"Is this some kind of trouble?" asked the young airport guard as he stepped out from behind the security desk with a skeptical frown. Walter Grayson, 79 years old, stood quietly by the gate, his worn Vietnam vet cap tilted slightly, hands clutching a leather satchel, his calm eyes gazing toward the departure boards. The guards exchanged impatient glances. "Sir, I need to see your ID and step away from the gate now." His voice was sharp. He wore a crisp black uniform, one hand hovering near his radio. What they didn't know was that in just a few minutes, 5 Humvees would roar up to the terminal, carrying soldiers ready to defend the man they'd mistaken for a lost senior. The Ohio Regional Airport was alive that morning, June 10th, 2025, just past noon, the air thick with the scent of jet fuel and the soft hum of travelers' voices. Walter Grayson was there, a figure you might have passed by without a second thought, his presence quiet yet heavy with years. He was a wiry man, his face carved with lines that spoke of sun-scorched fields and shadowed battlegrounds, his limp a gentle reminder of a life well lived. He shuffled toward Gate 12, his heart beating a little faster, not from the walk, but from the anticipation of what lay ahead. For 40 years he'd risen at dawn on his small farm near Chillicothe, tending the soil with hands that once held a rifle. Today, though, was different. He was headed to Washington, D.C. for a veterans reunion, a chance to sit with old friends, to let their laughter fill the hollow spaces left by time. Walter paused by the wide window, the tarmac stretching out before him like a canvas of memory. He watched a plane taxi, its engines humming a tune that carried him back to '68 to Vietnam, where he'd been a sergeant leading his platoon through muddy rice paddies under a sky torn by flares. He could still feel the weight of Private Jimmy Callahan in his arms, the boy's blood soaking through his uniform as he dragged him to safety. The Silver Star he'd earned a cold comfort for the loss. Those nights, the names of fallen friends, Jimmy, Tom, Eddie whispered through his dreams, a litany he'd never forget. Now at 79, he was alone, his Mary gone these past 5 years, her absence an ache that never faded. In his satchel, he carried her faded photo, a letter from a soldier he'd mentored, and a purple heart pinned to a worn jacket, tokens of a life he held close, not for pride, but for the love and loss they represented. Across the terminal, Officer Mark Hensley, just 32 and brimming with youthful zeal, had his eye on Walter. 2 years on the job had made him eager to prove his mettle, and to him this old man with a shaky gait seemed like a problem. "Hey, old-timer," Mark called out, his voice cutting through the murmur as he strode over with purpose. "You lost this gate's for departing passengers only." Walter turned slowly, his gray eyes steady as the Ohio hills. "No, son, I'm right where I need to be. Flight to D.C. 1:15. Mark squinted, his brow furrowing. "ID, please," and stepped back from the gate. Walter's hands trembled as he reached for his satchel, not from fear, but from the arthritis that gnawed at him on damp days. He pulled out a worn wallet, its leather cracked with age, and opened it to reveal a driver's license and military ID, both yellowed like old newspaper. Mark snatched them, his frown deepening. Walter Grayson, 79. "You sure you're fit to fly, sir? You look a little shaky." Beside him, Officer Lisa Carter, 28 and softer in spirit, shifted uneasily, her heart tugging at the sight of this frail figure. "Mark, maybe give him a minute," she murmured, her voice gentle, but he waved her off with a sharp gesture. "I'm fine, young lady," Walter said, his tone low but clear, carrying the weight of decades. "Been flying since before you were born." Mark smirked, unconvinced. "Yeah, well, times have changed. Let's get you to the side security protocol." He reached for Walter's arm, his grip firm yet tinged with impatience, and began guiding him toward the exit. Walter didn't pull away, but his eyes narrowed, a flicker of pride, igniting within them a spark from days when he'd stood tall under fire. Lisa followed her brow, creasing with doubt. Mark, he's got a ticket. Maybe we should check with the gate first. The folks around Gate 12 began to stir their attention, drawn to the unfolding scene. An elderly woman, Mrs. Ellen Pierce, 70, with a cane and a kind smile that spoke of her own years, stepped forward. "Leave that man alone," she said, her voice trembling, but resolute, a mother's protectiveness in her tone. "He's no troublemaker." Mark brushed her off, his focus locked on Walter. "Ma'am, step back. Sir, you need to come with us. We'll sort this out outside." He nudged Walter toward the door marked "Departures." Lisa, trailing behind, her radio crackling, but left unanswered, her conscience wrestling with protocol. Outside, the warm air wrapped around them, the tarmac shimmering under the midday sun. Walter stood still, his posture unwavering, as Mark demanded, "Empty your bag, sir. We need to make sure you're not carrying anything dangerous." Walter sighed, a sound heavy with resignation, and set the satchel down, opening it with care. Out came the photo of Mary, her smile frozen in time, the letter with its creased edges, the metals glinting faintly, each a piece of a heart Mark couldn't fathom. "Dangerous," Walter said, a touch of amusement softening his voice. "Son, the only thing dangerous here is your attitude." Mark's face flushed red, his pride stung. "Watch it, old man. Hands on the wall, feet apart." He patted Walter down, his hands brisk, finding nothing but the quiet dignity of a man who'd seen too much. Lisa stepped closer, her voice a whisper of concern. "Mark, this feels wrong. He's got military ID." "Maybe we should enough." Lisa, Mark snapped, his patience fraying. "He's confused. We're doing our job." The crowd from inside spilled out, their whispers rising like a soft wind. "Poor guy," a voice murmured. "Those guards are out of line." Walter remained silent, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the horizon where a faint rumble was growing, a sound that stirred something deep within him. Back inside, Tommy, a 24-year-old gate agent, with a mop of brown hair and an earnest face, overheard the commotion. He'd stumbled across Walter's name on a veteran's honor roll during a school project years ago, a name that had stuck with him. Fumbling with his phone, his fingers unsteady, he dialed the military base hotline. Hi, this is Tommy from Ohio Regional. We've got a veteran, Walter Grayson, being detained. Can you help?" On the other end, Captain Daniel Reed, 58, picked up his voice, steady but quickening with recognition. He'd been a Green lieutenant under Walter in the Gulf War, learning the hard lessons of leadership from the man who'd pulled him from a burning Humvee. "Did you say Walter Grayson?" he asked, a catch in his throat. "Hold on." He barked orders, his mind flashing to those desert nights. And within minutes, 5 Humvees were rolling toward the airport, their engines a thunderous promise across the plains. Outside, Mark's patience was wearing thin. "Sir, you're coming with us to the office. We'll call someone to pick you up." Walter turned, his gaze steady as a rock. "And what for, son? I've done nothing wrong. Inappropriate behavior." Mark said, his words hollow, grasping at straws. "And we need a medical eval before you fly." Lisa winced, her heart sinking. "Mark, that's a stretch." But he pressed on his hand, reaching for the cuffs at his belt, the metallic clink a jarring note in the warm air. The crowd grew, their murmurs a mix of concern and anger, Mrs. Pierce standing firm with her cane. Walter's mind drifted not to the present, but to Mary, her voice calling him home from those far-off wars, her hands soothing his scars. He felt a tear prick his eye, quickly blinked away as the rumble on the horizon grew louder, a sound that promised more than he could have hoped. The rumble on the horizon swelled into a roar, a sound that cut through the warm air like a memory breaking free as 5 Humvees screeched to a halt outside the Ohio Regional Airport, their tires kicking up dust that danced in the midday sun. Walter Grayson stood still, his worn Vietnam vet cap shadowing his steady gray eyes, the leather satchel hanging loosely at his side, while the crowd around him held its breath. Officer Mark Hensley froze his hand, still hovering near the cuffs, his face a mask of confusion and dread. Officer Lisa Carter stepped back, her heart pounding as the doors of the Humvees flew open and soldiers poured out their uniforms, crisp their movements, precise. Captain Daniel Reed emerged from the lead vehicle, his salute sharp as a blade. "Sergeant Grayson, sir, we've got this," he said, his voice carrying the weight of respect earned decades ago. The word sergeant hung in the air like a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Mark's jaw dropped, his bravado crumbling as the soldiers formed a protective line around Walter. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, a gasp escaping as she realized the depth of their mistake. Mrs. Ellen Pierce. 70 clutched her cane, tears glistening in her eyes as she whispered, "I knew he was special." The tension was palpable, a mix of awe and shame rippling through the onlookers, their phones still recording, capturing every moment of this unexpected turn. Reed turned to the guards, his gaze like steel. Who dared to lay hands on Sergeant Walter Grayson? Mark stammered, his voice cracking. We didn't know, sir. We were just following protocol." Reed's eyes narrowed, a storm brewing behind them. Protocol doesn't excuse disrespect. This man served 3 tours, Vietnam, the Gulf, Afghanistan. He's got a Silver Star, a Purple Heart, and a Distinguished Service Cross. He trained me and half the officers standing here today. You've just detained a living legend. His words struck like hammer blows, each one a testament to Walter's unseen valor. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath, as the weight of Reed's words sank in. Lisa felt a lump rise in her throat, her mind racing back to the military ID she glimpsed the medals tucked away in that satchel. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too small for the man he'd misjudged. Walter remained silent, his posture unwavering, but inside his heart ached with memories of muddy trenches, of Mary's letters read by lantern light, of the boys he couldn't save. He met Reed's eyes, a nod passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of battles fought and bonds forged. Reed stepped closer to the guards. "You owe this man an apology," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lisa found her voice first, stepping forward, her face flushed with regret. "Sir, I'm so sorry. We didn't mean." Walter raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "It's all right, young lady. You're learning. That's enough." His voice was soft, carrying a forgiveness that surprised her, a kindness born from years of carrying burdens others couldn't see. Mark swallowed hard, his pride warring with shame. "Sir, I was wrong. I'm sorry." The words came out halting, but they were genuine, a crack in his youthful armor. Walter turned to him, his gaze steady. "Son, we all make mistakes. The trick is learning from them." The crowd began to murmur again, but now it was with reverence. "Poor guy, what a hero," someone said. "Those guards really crossed a line," another added, their phones still rolling the footage destined to spread far beyond this tarmac. The airport manager, a stout man in a rumpled suit, rushed out, his hands ringing with nervous energy. "Mr. Grayson, please let us upgrade you to first class. We're so sorry for this mix-up." Walter shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "No need, son. Just do better next time." The manager nodded, flustered, as the soldiers parted, forming a corridor of honor for Walter to walk through. Mrs. Pierce shuffled forward, her cane tapping the ground, and took his arm. "You're a good man," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Walter patted her hand, his touch gentle. "Thank you, ma'am. Just an old farmer now." As Walter made his way back inside, the weight of the moment settled over him. He thought of Mary, her voice calling him home from those far-off wars, her hands soothing his scars. The soldiers escorted him to the gate, their presence a shield against the stairs, and Lisa followed at a distance, her mind churning. She'd seen the photo of Mary fall from the satchel, the love in Walter's eyes as he tucked it back, and it stirred something in her, a longing to understand, to make amends. Weeks later, the incident had rippled through the community. The airport implemented a veteran sensitivity training program, a direct result of that day's lesson. Lisa volunteered to lead it, her guilt transforming into a quiet mission. One afternoon, she drove out to Walter's farm, her hands tight on the steering wheel, a box of homemade cookies, her grandmother's recipe, on the passenger seat. The farm was modest, a white clapboard house with a sagging porch, surrounded by fields where corn swayed in the breeze. Walter was there, bent over a fence post, hammer in hand, his Harley-Davidson parked in the shade. She stepped out, her voice tentative. "Colonel Grayson or Sergeant, I wanted to apologize proper." Walter straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, and waved her over. "Call me Walter, child. And those cookies smell like heaven. Come on in." Inside, the kitchen was simple, the table scarred with years, and he poured coffee into mismatched mugs. They sat, the silence comfortable at first, then filled with her questions. "What was it like in Vietnam?" she asked, her eyes wide. Walter leaned back, his gaze distant. "Mud up to your knees, fear in your gut, and boys looking to you to keep them alive. I carried Private Callahan out one night, his blood on my hands, and I prayed he'd make it. He didn't." Lisa listened, her heart aching, as he spoke of Mary, of letters read by lantern light, of the nights he'd come home to her embrace. "You learned to keep going," he said, his voice breaking slightly, for them and for the ones waiting. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes, and offered the cookies. He took one, smiling. "Your grandma knew her way around a kitchen." They talked for hours, the farm's quiet wrapping around them. And when she left, she felt lighter, a piece of his story now hers to carry. Mark, too, had changed. Assigned to shadow Lisa during the training, his pride had taken a hit, but his eyes were opening. One day at a community veterans event, he approached Walter, hat in hand. "Sir, I was wrong that day. I'd like to make it up." Walter clapped him on the shoulder, his grip firm despite his age. "Son, the best way is to listen next time. That's all any of us can do." Mark nodded, a lesson sinking deep, and joined the training with a newfound respect. The Humvee incident had sparked something bigger. Local news picked it up, and soon veterans groups across Ohio were pushing for better treatment. Captain Reed visited, often bringing young soldiers to hear Walter's tales. "They need to know where their strength comes from," Reed said one evening, watching Walter mend a fence. Walter grinned, the lines on his face deepening. "They'll find it in themselves, Dan. Just give them time." As summer faded into fall, Walter prepared for a trip to Arlington, invited by the Veterans Association to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The day was rainy, a soft drizzle that soaked into his bones, but he stood tall, his uniform pressed, Mary's photo in his pocket. The ceremony was solemn, the guard steps precise, and as he placed the wreath, he whispered, "For you, Mary, and for the boys." Lisa was there, watching from the crowd, her father, a retired Navy man, beside her. He shook Walter's hand, his voice gruff. "You're the real deal, sir." Walter chuckled. "Just an old farmer now, but I appreciate that." The crowd applauded, and for a moment the rain paused, as if the nation held its breath. Back home, Walter sat by the fire, the photo of Mary glowing in the lamplight. He thought of the soldiers he'd lost, their names etched in stone, and the ones whose stories lived on in hearts like his. The farm was quiet, but it was full of memories, of lessons, of a life well lived. This is the story of a guard and a girl, of a rainy day at Arlington, of a photograph and an insignia that bridged the gap between duty and humanity. It's a reminder that at the tomb of the unknown soldier, where every step and every pause is a tribute, sometimes the greatest way to honor the fallen is through an act of kindness that keeps their memory alive. So take a moment today, think of Walter of Mary, of the soldiers whose names we'll never know. Share this story not just to remember them, but to remind us all that compassion is the truest form of duty. And if you're ever in Arlington, stand at the tomb, count the steps and listen. You might just hear the heartbeat of a nation beating strong through the rain.